Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm your storyteller, and today we're diving into the early history of the Zhou Dynasty. Why talk about this? Because the rise of the Qin people is directly tied to the decline of the Western Zhou. The Zhou Dynasty is split into the Western Zhou and Eastern Zhou periods. The capital of the Western Zhou was Haojing, and the capital of the Eastern Zhou was Luoyang. One of the major events marking this shift is the Haojing Rebellion, and I'll get into that story later. Today, though, we'll cover the historical background and external environment leading up to the rise of the Qin, so you can better understand the context and opportunities that shaped this period of history. From King Wen to the Duke of Zhou. The foundation of the Zhou Dynasty. The founder of the Zhou Dynasty was King Wen. But did you know that King Wen was actually loyal to the Shang King, King Zhou, all his life? Despite being called the ruler of 2/3 of the world in the historical texts, meaning he had control over most of the trade in the region, King Wen never openly rebelled against the Shang. It was his son, King Wu, who led the rebellion. King Wu, backed by various feudal lords, defeated King Zhou of Shang and established the Zhou Dynasty. However, the process of founding a new dynasty wasn't easy. After defeating Shang, King Wu died just 2 years later, and his younger brother, the Duke of Zhou, became the central figure in Zhou history. When King Wu died, internal strife erupted in the Zhou court. King Wu's younger brothers, along with the exiled Shang Prince Wu Geng, tried to overthrow the Zhou dynasty. This event is known as the Three Supervisors Rebellion. It was the first major crisis after the Zhou dynasty was founded. Failian, the ancestor of the Qin people, participated in this failed restoration war. At the critical moment, the Duke of Zhou supported King Wu's son, King Cheng, and became the regent. Through his firm stance, he quelled the rebellion. After 3 years of military campaigns, the Duke of Zhou defeated the rebels and stabilized Zhou rule. This period marked the turning point from the founding of the Zhou dynasty to its consolidation of power. Interestingly, one of Failian's grandsons left for the western regions, becoming part of the Zhirong tribes. This group, later known as the Qin people, is the ancestor of the Qin dynasty, the Cheng-Kang era, the first golden age of the Zhou. After the Duke of Zhou's death, King Cheng of Zhou took full control and ended the political struggles. With King Cheng and his son King Kang's 46-year reign, the Zhou dynasty entered a rare period of peace and prosperity, often referred to as the Cheng-Kang era. Records state that during this time, for over 40 years, the laws were not enforced, meaning the society was peaceful and the economy thrived, laying a solid foundation for the Zhou dynasty's future. From King Xiao to King Mu, expansion and internal strife. After the Cheng-Kang era ended, King Xiao ascended the throne. He was an ambitious ruler, focusing on the eastern Dongyi and southern Jingchu regions. His successful campaigns against the Dongyi tribes led to their submission to the Zhou dynasty, and he even brought 26 Dongyi states into Zhou's sphere. The records also mention King Xiao's 3 attacks on Jingchu, which were initially successful. However, his southern campaigns ultimately ended in failure with the loss of 6 armies at the Han River. This brief entry hides many unknowns and remains a historical mystery. Some scholars believe his failure could have been caused by a sudden flood, while others speculate he died from illness or accident during the campaign. After King Xiao, King Mu ascended the throne. By this time, the Dongyi and Jingchu regions were largely pacified, so King Mu turned his attention westward to the Zhirong tribes. However, the vastness and complexity of the western lands far exceeded his expectations, leading to prolonged warfare. In a previous video, I discussed King Mu's obsession with the Western Queen Mother. This obsession, often depicted in folklore, was likely connected to his military expeditions to the west, possibly in pursuit of the legendary queen. While historical records don't confirm this romantic element, it remains an important part of the stories passed down through generations, highlighting King Mu's western campaigns. Despite some gains, King Mu's military expansions severely drained the Zhou dynasty's resources. Internal dissatisfaction among the vassals began to grow, and Zhou's once strong rule began to falter. From King Gong to King Yi, the turning point of the Western Zhou. After King Mu's death, King Gong of Zhou took the throne. During his reign, he adopted a strategy of compromise with external enemies and focused on internal governance, which temporarily stabilized the dynasty. Historians often describe King Gong as weak, but in reality, the Zhou dynasty's internal conditions had deteriorated significantly after 50 years of war. King Gong's death led to King Yi's reign, a period marked by a decision that would have lasting consequences for the Zhou dynasty. King Yi abandoned the strategic stronghold of Qishan, modern-day Tianshui in Gansu, retreating to Baoji. This decision allowed the Xirong tribes to quickly gain strength and eventually posed a threat to Zhou's rule. From this point, the Zhou dynasty's position shifted from offensive to defensive, marking the beginning of the decline of the Western Zhou. Now let me explain something to you all. Qishan was a vital military base for the Zhou dynasty. Controlling it allowed them to effectively defend against an attack surrounding enemies. Losing Qishan meant Zhou lost the strategic initiative in the west, allowing the Xirong to rise up and eventually threaten Zhou's power. After King Yi's death, the royal family chose to have his uncle, King Xiao, succeed him instead of his son. This decision would later be considered usurpation, but at the time, it was a necessary one for the stability of the dynasty. King Xiao, the stabilizing force and the rise of the Qin. King Xiao's rise was crucial for maintaining stability during a time of internal crisis. Though later historians labeled his ascension as usurpation, in reality, it was a pragmatic choice to stabilize the Zhou dynasty. King Xiao implemented a series of strategies to divide the Xirong tribes, which helped stabilize Zhou's borders. Without his efforts, Zhou might have collapsed during this period. His decisions directly impacted the rise of the Qin people, as they were reintegrated into the Zhou family after this period of turmoil. The story of King Xiao and the Qin people is something we'll delve into in future videos. Just a quick note for those watching. In ancient China, the process of royal succession often involved complex political maneuvering. While it was common for a son to inherit the throne, having an uncle succeed the king was considered usurpation because it broke the father-son succession rule. However, given the exceptional circumstances of the time, this succession was a strategic decision to prevent the collapse of the Zhou dynasty. King Xiao was truly a savior of the Zhou dynasty, though his unique position as the uncle of the previous king led to his later vilification in historical texts. He did so much for the stability of Zhou, but because his ascent was so unusual, later historians downplayed his importance. But when it comes to telling the story of the Qin Empire, we can't overlook King Xiao. Without him, there would be no Qin Empire. Summary: from King Wen to King Xiao, the Western Zhou experienced three major stages: the founding of the dynasty, its golden age, and its decline. In the next video, we'll continue the story of King Xiao and the Qin people, exploring how the Qin rose from the Xirong tribes and eventually laid the foundation for the great Qin Empire. Stay tuned.